Mid-season driver changes in Formula 1, they've become much more of a regular occurrence in recent years, and they can play out two different ways. They either work really well or prove a complete disaster. So when Williams decided that it was going to replace Logan Sargeant mid-season with Franco Colapinto, I thought that this was going to turn out to be a mistake, that it was going to go badly. But just 3 races into his Formula 1 career, Colapinto has not only proved me wrong, but he's proved all of his doubters and critics wrong. So how has he done it? Well, let's analyse his season so far. First of all though, let's just have a deeper dive into Colapinto's career in motorsport so far, because he's obviously worked his way up through the junior ranks, and last year he finished as runner-up to Gabriel Bortoleto in F3, so he was very much a young and up-and-coming talent coming through the junior categories, and that obviously led to him being promoted to F2 for this year. And his season in F2 I would class as sort of solid if unspectacular. He had done a very good job though. He was sitting 6th in the standings when he was obviously given this chance to fill the Williams vacancy, and he'd won a sprint race at Imola. So out of all the rookies that were competing in F2 this season, he was the highest placed rookie in the standings, even ahead of Kimi Antonelli, who of course will be racing for Mercedes next year. But even despite his performances in F2, he was obviously quite a regular point scorer. There was never really any sign of him being linked to a Formula 1 seat anytime soon. It seemed like he was going to be embedding himself in F2 for at least another season in 2025 and maybe even a third campaign in 2026 before he was going to get himself a real shot at making the step up to F1. But all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, there was suddenly an opportunity to make the step up to Formula 1 when Williams announced that he had finally lost patience with Logan Sargeant after a string of poor performances and a string of crashes that was clearly costing the team a lot of money, and they finally decided to drop him after the Dutch Grand Prix when he obviously had another heavy crash in free practice 1 where he completely destroyed the car, and that was really the moment when it clearly decided enough is enough, we have to make a change in our driver lineup. But at the same time that they announced that Sargeant would be dropped for the rest of the season, Williams caused quite a shock when it announced that Colapinto would be the driver that they had chosen to replace Sargeant for the remaining 9 races, which, when you consider the options that were available to them, and certainly there were a lot more drivers with a lot more Formula 1 experience or racing experience, it was a bit of a surprise that they went with Colapinto, despite the fact he is part of the Williams Driver Academy. I mean, one driver in particular who was closely linked to the Williams seat and obviously had previous F1 experience was Mick Schumacher, but obviously Williams decided that Mick really wasn't the type of driver that they were looking for. James Vowles obviously blunt about Schumacher's abilities and what he really could offer to the team, which was a bit of a surprise given that obviously Mick, despite the fact his Formula 1 career didn't turn out as planned, he is obviously an F2 and F3 champion. I mean, I suppose at the time I kind of understood why Williams had chosen Franco over Mick, because they obviously felt that there was clearly no risk for them to promote Colapinto from F2 and give him a shot at F1. There was going to be absolutely no pressure on him to deliver, given that they'd obviously confirmed their driver lineup for 2025. Carlos Sainz will be joining the team on a 2+2 deal, so their driver lineup was sorted for the future. Colapinto was obviously going to still be part of their long-term plans, I'm guessing, because obviously he's part of the academy, but even still, given that there was no chance of him joining the team next year, there was no pressure on him to deliver straight away. I think my main concern was the fact that this had a very similar ring to Sargeant's promotion in 2023. Sargeant had only done 1 season in F2 and he'd done a respectable job. He'd won races and I think he finished in the top 5 in the championship, but it was still quite obvious that he wasn't quite ready to be a Formula 1 driver. He still needed that extra year to embed himself in Formula 2, gain knowledge, gain more experience, improve himself, get himself more rounded as a driver, as a more complete driver. And it was pretty obvious from the start, even though he had quite a respectable debut in Bahrain, from there onwards the struggles began to show, and he was crashing a lot more often. He was clearly lacking in pace compared to Alex Albon, and he simply just was not delivering on a consistent basis. Now that we know that this obviously has not worked out, we can safely say now that the decision that Williams made to promote Sargeant clearly backfired on them, because Sargeant was simply not ready for Formula 1. And I think a clear sign that Williams had finally lost patience with Sargeant and was looking around at for someone who could possibly replace him in the either short to medium term future was obviously in Melbourne, when obviously Albon crashed. So they decided to put Albon in Sargeant's car instead of allowing Sargeant to be the sole Williams driver for the rest of that weekend. And that really was a telltale sign that they clearly did not have enough faith and trust in Sargeant to deliver on track. And this leads me on nicely to what was my next concern with Franco's appointment, was the fact that he could suffer a similar fate to what Logan did, be drafted in too soon, too quickly, and all of his confidence would be shattered because he would not be able to live up to the standards, the expectations that comes with being a Formula One driver. And if he, underperformed, the road back to Formula One was always going to be either very difficult or completely impossible. And on top of that, I didn't see how Franco could win out of this situation, because regardless of whether he did a good or bad job, he wasn't going to be getting in a Formula 1 seat, because as I mentioned, Williams had already confirmed their driver line, not just for 25 but for 2026 and beyond that. So even if he was going to exceed expectations and do a good job and regularly do a better job than what Sargeant did, it wasn't going to bring him what he would be hoping for, which was a seat in Formula 1. But if we just analyse the 3 races that he's done so far, which obviously was Monza, Baku and Singapore, he has completely exceeded expectations for what was expected of him. He has barely put a foot wrong in those 3 Grand Prix that he's done so far. He has been outstanding. I have to give it to him. What's impressed me the most is that he looks as though he's been driving in Formula 1 for years. He clearly was not fazed by making the jump or the step up to Formula 1. And what's pleasing for Williams is the fact that he is running Albon a lot harder than what Sargeant did. He's a lot closer to him, both over a lap and in race pace as well. And that's exactly what Williams would have wanted from their second driver. It's something that they simply have not had for quite a number of years now, where they've had 2 drivers that have been on a similar level and been able to push one another to new heights and ultimately benefit the team. For me, his best performance so far has got to be Baku, because I was really impressed with how he recovered from his crash in practice. I remember thinking at the time that when we saw Franco's car in the wall, that this was going to be the real test now, real test of his nerve. Can he put that crash to the back of his mind and not let it affect his confidence, and he can come straight back out on the next lap and perform as if nothing had happened? And that's exactly what happened. And even more impressive, he actually got quicker and quicker that weekend, despite the fact he'd never driven the Baku circuit before. So he managed to get into Q3 for the first time, out-qualified Albon, and then in the race scored points, finishing in 8th place, which is exactly why Williams hired him in the first place. I suppose I should also compliment his first lap in Singapore, because it was mighty impressive, given that he made quite actually a poor start. His car bogged down off the line, and then he completely dive-bombed everyone into turn 1 and made up about 4 or 5 places. It was really, really impressive, given that he'd fully committed to braking late into turn 1 to make up places, but he didn't lock up, he didn't run anyone else off the road, he obviously didn't crash, and ended up at the end of the first lap being in P9, having started P12. So that really took everyone's notice. I would even go as far as saying that I think that not just that move, but I think that Albon is starting to get a little bit rattled by Colapinto, because Franco is clearly pushing him a lot harder than he ever has been during his Williams career. He's obviously been alongside Nicholas Latifi and Sargeant, and neither of them could match his performances. He was clearly the golden boy at Williams, the number 1 driver, and now Franco has come in. He's only coming in for these 9 races, and already he's really pushing him to new heights and forcing him to excel in areas that he hasn't had to do in recent years. And Franco's performances have not just obviously impressed Williams, but they've clearly impressed other teams. The only remaining seat on the grid for 2025 is Sauber, and we believe from obviously what we're reading that Franco is actually a bit of an outsider for that seat, even though it does seem likely that Valtteri Bottas is going to be retained for at least another year. But even still, this is going to surely elevate Franco's chances of being in Formula 1 in the near future. I think a 2026 seat is very much on the cards now. I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him, and what's great for Formula 1 is, given that he's obviously from Argentina, we've already seen at a number of races there's clearly quite a large fan base that are following him or following his journey into Formula 1. And we know just how passionate the Argentinians are about Formula 1, given the history that they've got in the sport. Argentina also used to be on the calendar, and it always drew quite a large crowd, so they're clearly passionate about their Formula 1 still, even despite the fact that they haven't had a driver for over 2 decades now. And Colapinto looks as though he is going to be that guy to get Argentina back on the Formula 1 map. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Colapinto gets on, not just for the remaining races, but also for his future career. So it's safe to say that I've got to hold my hands up and admit I was wrong about Franco Colapinto. So there you have it, guys. Feel free to leave your comments on today's topic in the comments section. And if you are new around here, don't forget to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.